Welcome to the cockpit. Look, I know you're glancing out that window right now, watching that windsock whip entirely sideways, and yeah, I completely get it if you're feeling a little nervous. It's totally natural. But as your instructor, I promise you this. By the end of this explainer, we're going to break this whole maneuver down together, step by step. So when your hand finally goes on that throttle, you're going to feel 100% in control.
So let's just dive right in, okay? We have to acknowledge the absolute first and honestly the most important decision we make before we even think about touching that throttle. And that's deciding if it's actually safe to leave the ground today. Just because there's a runway right there in front of us doesn't mean we're obligated to use it.
Right, here's the absolute golden rule of aviation. The airplane wants to fly, but you never, ever have to force it. Every single plane out there, from our little trainer all the way up to a 747, has a maximum crosswind component printed right in its flight manual. But listen, beyond the manual, there's your personal limit. If the math says we're legally fine, but your gut as a student pilot is telling you no way, well, we stay put. It's always, always better to be down here wishing you were up there than up there praying you were back down here.
Okay, so how do we actually calculate that crosswind strength so we can make that go or no-go call? Let's do some quick mental math using the table we have here. We don't just care about the total wind speed, right? We have to look at the angle of the wind compared to our runway. Say the wind is blowing 30 degrees off our nose. We only feel half of its total strength pushing us sideways. So a 20-knot wind at 30 degrees, that's really just a 10-knot crosswind. But check out that bottom row. At 90 degrees, meaning it's blowing straight across the runway, boom, we take the full 100% brunt of it. And this illustrates how that math plays out in the real world. See how those arrows work? As the wind angle widens out from the nose, going from 30 to 45 to 60 degrees, that crosswind component pushing against the side of the plane just skyrockets. I mean, at 60 degrees, you're already fighting 90% of the total wind speed. This is exactly why we calculate this before every single flight, without fail. It tells us right away if we're safely within the airplane's limits, and honestly, our own skill level for the day. Section 2, the physics of weather vaning, understanding the invisible forces.
All right, so we've run the numbers, the wind is within our limits. Great. Now, the biggest invisible force we're going to fight on the runway is called weather vaning. You know when you grab a shopping cart at the grocery store and it has that one busted wheel that just constantly, violently yanks you to one side? That is exactly what weather vaning feels like in an airplane. Because we have these huge flat surfaces, basically the entire tail section, sitting way behind our main wheels, the crosswind just shoves against that tail. It literally tries to spin the nose of the plane right into the wind. To see how we actually fight back against that, take a look at the center of gravity, that CG right there, and that big red arrow shoving the tail. To stop the plane from spinning into the wind, like a weather vane on a barn roof, we have to aggressively step on the opposite rudder pedal. It's simple. If the wind is blowing from the right, the plane desperately wants to turn right. So we step hard on the left rudder to keep that nose tracking perfectly straight down the center line.
Next up, mastering the takeoff roll, the dance of the controls. So you've got the physics down, you know how to keep her straight, but now we really need to talk about how different today is going to feel compared to your previous lessons. On a totally calm day, your hands and feet are basically neutral, right? Just relaxed. Not today. Today we're using what we call crossed controls. Because that wind is actively trying to lift up our upwind wing, you have to twist the yoke firmly into the wind to hold that wing down. But at the exact same time, you're pressing the opposite rudder pedal to drive us straight. Yoke left, right rudder, or yoke right, left rudder. I know, it feels completely unnatural at first, but it is absolutely crucial. Let's mentally walk through the actual steps here. First, plant the nose wheel onto the pavement with just a tiny bit of forward pressure on the yoke. That just gives us way better steering. Second, steer down that center line using your feet on the rudder. But here's the catch. As we speed up, the air rushing over your wings and tail gets faster, which makes your controls a lot more sensitive. So step 4 is super important. As we go faster, you'll need to smoothly, naturally back off those heavy aileron and rudder inputs. It's this incredibly dynamic, constantly changing dance. Moving right along to liftoff and managing drift, leaving the ground cleanly. Okay, so eventually we hit our rotation speed. Now, transitioning from rolling along the ground to actually flying in a moving block of air, well, that takes a very deliberate action. On a nice calm day, we just gently let the plane fly itself off the runway. Yeah, scratch that for today. Today, we are intentionally keeping the plane on the ground for an extra 5 knots of airspeed. Why? Because when we do finally pull back on the yoke, we want to snap off the runway cleanly and positively. If we drag it out and lift off too slowly, the crosswind will immediately shove us sideways while the tires are still skimming the asphalt. And skipping sideways puts some really dangerous stress on the landing gear. So we lift off a little fast and a lot clean. Check out this takeoff sequence, moving left to right. In position 1, we're totally pinned to that center line with our cross controls. Position 2 is that clean, positive liftoff we just talked about. But look really closely at position 3 and 4. The absolute second our wheels break free from the ground, we let the airplane do what it's been begging to do all along. We let it weather vane. We just let the nose turn slightly right into the wind. And honestly, the moment you feel we're safely flying and clear of the pavement, that whole awkward cross-control dance is totally done. You can let out a huge sigh of relief. You just relax your foot on that heavy rudder, center up the balance ball, level your wings, and just let the nose crab into the wind. It's exactly like pointing a boat upstream to go straight across a fast-moving river. We're doing the exact same thing to track straight out on the extended runway center line.
Section, the crosswind traffic pattern, flying the rectangle in moving air.
All right, awesome job, we're in the air. But you're the pilot, which means your job is far from over just because we left the ground. We still have to navigate the whole airport traffic pattern while this massive invisible river of air keeps stubbornly pushing us sideways. If you want to fly a perfect, professional-looking rectangle over the ground, you have to constantly tweak your heading on every single leg to fight that drift. Crosswind leg, downwind, base, we are always crabbing the nose toward the wind. Because if you just try to fly standard 90-degree turns today, the wind will literally blow us miles away from the airport.
Which brings us to a massively important point about airmanship. Remember, we're flying this weird angled, crabbed pattern, but there might be other pilots out there flying a totally standard, straight pattern right over the top of us. It is 100% on us to keep our heads on a swivel, look out the window, and avoid them. Traffic flying the standard pattern generally has the right of way, so safety and separation, that's entirely on your shoulders.
Let's zoom out and look at the whole shebang here. This entire maneuver, from doing the math at the hold short line, to pulling off that crossed control takeoff, to perfectly crabbing down the downwind leg, it's all about one thing: positive, structured control over your airplane. You are telling the aircraft exactly where to go, instead of letting the atmosphere toss you around. You are truly acting as the pilot in command. So you've got the tools, you've got the math, and you know the physics. You are totally ready to get us safely off the ground today. You're going to do great. But what goes up must come down, right? The wind certainly hasn't stopped blowing, and that runway hasn't gotten any wider. So the real question is, now that we're up here, are you ready to figure out how we actually land this thing?